Meditation. We talk about this shit all the time. We hear it everywhere. But how can it actually help us peel away past hurts and help us get to our true selves that we're really looking for?
Converting that awareness inside, and you're becoming aware of the emotional baggage. And awareness is our discovery tool and our healing tool, because when you discover what's wrong, you're not going to just leave it there. You say, oh, well, that's silly. I don't need that anymore. And you get rid of it.
Have you ever felt like your past hurts are hiding who you really are? Like there's a you waiting to shine through, but you're not sure how to let her out? Ever wonder if it's too late for a new beginning? Our guest stands as proof that change can happen at any time and at any age. Welcome back to Connection Over Perfection. I'm your host, Amber McCrea, and today we are joined by a guest whose own transformation story can inspire your next steps, and who also reminds us that our story of healing is always unfolding. He was just like any of us until he turned 50 and discovered meditation. This simple practice opened up a world of insights, which he's been sharing for over 2 decades. He's not just about new ideas, he's about reviving the deep truths that time has often buried. He's an author, a healer, and a fellow podcast host who lights the way for those of us seeking to learn and grow. Are you ready to learn how to start the next chapter of your life? Stay tuned and help me welcome Dean Graves to the show. We are honored to have you, Dean. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Amber. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, yes. So, Dean, in your meditation and your teachings, you often talk about these profound insights into your true self. And I think so many of us are on the journey of figuring out what exactly that means, our true selves. So, how do you guide someone to help peel back those layers of their past hurts to reveal their authentic self?
That's a loaded question.
Maybe we want to backtrack.
No, but the answer will require some unpacking.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. We all are born into, you can call it innocence or ignorance. It's virtually the same thing. And we are designed to have experiences. And through those experiences, we are tasked with learning. What we're tasked with learning is about ourselves. We perceive that we're learning about the world. We perceive that we're learning about other people. But the world and other people are simply bringing us opportunities through the process of analogy, determine what we like and what we don't like. We experience a lot of what we don't like because it's all trial and error. But as we
That's the
have
truth.
experiences, then we are narrowing down more succinctly what it is that we like. We go through this process until we reach a point in our life, and that point can be at any time while we are still alive, um, of becoming aware that what we're doing and how we're doing it doesn't work, that it's not bringing us greater happiness, or at least as not as much happiness as we think we need or deserve. We are all motivated to get more of what we like. And what we like varies from person to person according to how we have assessed our experiences to date. Awakening is a point of transformation. But all awakening is the realization and the heartfelt realization that what I've been doing isn't working. That is all awakening is. But at that point, we enter into somewhat of a void in that if what I've been doing isn't working, what is going to work? Do I continue with more diligence to do what I've been doing in the past, or do I change that entirely? The process of changing entirely allows us to not only escalate our awareness, but to learn that awareness is a tool. Up to this point of awakening, invariably, we will have our awareness directed outside of us. In other words, we're observing other people, we're observing the world around us, And we're actually trying to manipulate the world in order to conform to how we have created our self-perception.
Mm.
At that point of awakening, then we are tasked with inverting that awareness to look inside of us, because we're the only thing that we can change. We can't change other people, we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. And so that exercise of simply turning that awareness around that has previously been pointed outside of us and pointing it inside of us gives us the opportunity to begin the self-exploration process. The self-exploration process is what we are tasked with, because it is through that self-exploration process that we begin to make the fine-tuned discernments of what it is that I really like. And all of our ambitions of being financially successful or relationship successful, things of that nature, fall by the wayside. And we begin to realize that the beliefs that we have incorporated into our perception of self, either through osmosis or with aware incorporation. In other words, most of the beliefs that we have about ourselves are things that we've accepted because of our culture, our family, friends, and so forth. But we didn't really make a conscious decision that, yes, that's something I want to incorporate into my perception of self. We've just absorbed that. And those oftentimes cause us great stress and are a primary source of our dissatisfaction, our unhappiness. What we ultimately are seeking is love. But part of this process of being born into innocence is we don't know what love is. And so we misperceive, based upon our culture primarily, love is something that someone has to give us. Love is not a commodity. It's not something that we can get from anyone. It is an inherent characteristic of who we are. It is a condition of being. And so all the times in our lives that we have felt love is because that person, place, or the situation has allowed us to surrender this false perception of self that we have created and be who we really are. And so we are feeling how we really are. And so the process of healing is the process of becoming aware of the emotional baggage that we have collected as a result of our hurts, as you describe them, healing the emotional attachment that we have made to those experiences, letting those go, and then by doing that, having more energy in order to focus on the beliefs that we've incorporated into our identity, into our perception of self, and begin to peel those away as also. And it's very much like peeling an onion. We assume certain things are true, that are factual, but as we examine them from an objective perspective through introspection, when then we begin to throw those away. And as we throw those away, then we become more of our authentic self, which is the love that we seek. And so the healing process is a process of self-introspection, healing the hurts, the emotional baggage that we have collected over a lifetime, is the process of healing our interpretation of experiences with emotion. Emotion is a greatly misunderstood concept. We have probably thousands of names for different emotions. What those are describing are our condition of being. In and of itself, it is not an emotion. An emotion is very simple. It's nothing more than our determination at the time that we are having the experience, either this thought, which is a complete emotion, this thought feels good and I like it and I want more of it, or it doesn't feel good and I don't like it, I don't want any more of it. And so through this process of analogy, we're narrowing down what it is that we like. And you have a question. I saw it in your eyes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can we pause there for a moment and talk about the emotions and that the thought is a complete emotion? Can you say what you said again?
It is a complete emotion. Time is a flow of thoughts, and we by design are only able to process one thought at a time. Now, because of our low level of awareness in our evolutionary process, we perceive an experience the last 30 minutes, an hour, some period of time. But in that perception of an experience are dozens of thoughts. With every single thought that we process, we are obligated to make the decision of either this thought feels good and I like it and I want more of it, or it doesn't feel good and I don't like it. I don't want more of it. Now, usually we're probably most familiar with the negative experiences, what we interpreted as a negative experience. And well, we also perceive that we create thoughts. We don't create thoughts. We attract thoughts according to how we are. Thoughts are the conceptual part of creation. And so, according to how we are, we attract the thoughts that match up, that line up with how we are at that point of time, our condition of being.
So would that be like frequency?
Our frequency has a lot to do with it. As we elevate, as we heal, our frequency escalates. And the higher our frequency, the less attuned we are with negative thoughts.
So say you are at a higher level of healing, right? Or frequency
Mm-hmm.
or awareness. Say you're there and a traumatic experience happens. Does that mean you drop back down?
Yeah, temporarily, but we can talk about traumas as a specific type of interpretation of an experience.
Okay.
You are more or less likely to have a negative experience if you are vibrating at a high frequency than you are if you are already burdened with a low frequency condition of being. Because it is your determination, your assessment of the situation. And if your awareness is outside of you, then you are vulnerable to attracting experiences, thoughts that are negative in their nature. And we have the tendency to attract one, say, for example, we are feeling sad. We're going to attract thoughts that reinforce that sadness, and it becomes a downward spiral. So we go from sadness to sorrow, and if the experience interprets it, the condition of grief. And grief is not just the loss of a person or whatever. We can feel the intensity of grief. They're just varying degrees of intensity. And so without awareness, if our awareness is outside of us and not directed inside, then we will follow that downward cycle because we're lowering our condition of being vibration as we follow that trend down. We're attracting more and more thoughts that are going to reinforce our lessening condition.
Did you say awareness is the same as like frequency? Or are those two different things to you?
Well, they're two different things. Awareness also is an inherent characteristic that we have, and our task as creatures of creation at the range of consciousness that we currently are experiencing as a collective is to become aware, first of all, and then actually become awareness. We will reach a point where we actually are awareness, which is the peak of our vibrational frequency at this range of consciousness.
So would you say that consciousness and awareness are different then? Awareness is more personal and consciousness is collective?
Well, awareness is an inherent characteristic. Consciousness is who we are.
Oh, could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Okay. Everything that we experience and everything that we are is consciousness. We are a mind, body, spirit. Our mind is a product of spirit. Our body is a product of our mind. let me start from the beginning, okay?
Okay.
Creation began because the creator, the one infinite creator, desired to know itself by experiencing itself. That's the purpose of creation. The one infinite creator desired to know itself by and determined that the best way to do that was to experience itself. Now, if you're the one infinite creator, all that you can know is yourself because you're everything. You're infinite. Infinity is not a bunch of stuff, it's everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the numerical value of infinity is one. Any other number is finite. And so the creator, in order to experience itself, projected into a conceptual environment the thought of free will. Now, free will is a concept that has been debated by philosophers for centuries. And their perception, without exception, is we either have the ability to choose to go right or to go left, or it's predetermined, and that's the general nature of their perpetual debate. But free will is more basic than that. Free will is the perception of separation. You have to perceive yourself as separate in order to have a choice of going right or going left. If there is no right and there is no left, it's not a choice.
Well, that's really big.
Well, yeah, but it's the basis of who we are.
What do you think about the statement then we're born in love, so there's love and fear?
Fear is anything that we don't like, and it can be everything from a minor fear to a very intense fear.
But in that statement that separation, we're choosing, or that there would have to be a separation, that would be a separation, correct?
Well, if fear would be a separation, yeah, and that is our basic fear.
Right.
The one infinite creator, in order to explore itself, had to create another one of itself conceptually. And so by projecting the distortion, and separation is a distortion, the one infinite creator, being the creator is the object, the original creator, and by projecting this concept of free will into a concept of itself, created the creator as the subject. So by observing itself as the creator is the subject, the creator is the object, learns of itself. Because the creator is the subject, has that free will opportunity to decide differently than the creator is the object. But the creator is the subject is a concept.
That's a lot. Is there another way we could say that for the listeners to like be able to digest that?
Well, that is the perception of separation. If you wanted to learn about yourself and how you would respond to situations before yourself experienced it, then you would project a mirror image of yourself and allow that mirror image of yourself to conceptually experience, and you could observe and learn from that by observation.
Just a quick interruption.
Yo, this is Hunter from the Everything's Connected podcast. You clearly have great taste in podcasts because you're listening to this awesome show. Did you know I am also part of the Podcast Connection Network? That's right. There's a whole network of shows dedicated to mental health and holistic well-being, just like this one. So if you're looking to expand your horizons and explore some incredible content, check us out. The link to the Podcast Connection Network is waiting for you in the description below.
Okay, now back to the show.
Wow. Okay, so where, in your opinion, does higher self, or is that it like your highest frequency? How does that fit into this?
Okay, free will works as an intoxicant, just like whiskey. When someone drinks whiskey or does drugs, the effect is that it lowers their awareness. Okay,
Mhm.
so people that invariably, when somebody does something stupid, you ask the question, well, was alcohol involved? So, well, yeah, it was. I would never have done that if I hadn't been drinking,
Right.
so.
Yeah.
And free will has that same effect on spirit, on us. And so the creator, in order to completely know itself, the creator as the subject now becomes the creator by creating fractals of itself by increasing the degree of free will intoxication. In other words, the perception of separation. We as humans perceive ourselves to be completely autonomous of the creator. In every religion that has ever been created has been predicated upon the perception of a God and us. But the reality is there is no separation. We are a more intoxicated level of consciousness. When the creator began creation by projecting that free will intoxication, or that free will into an aspect of itself, that began creation, and that is consciousness. Because we perceive ourselves as separate from the creator, we are consciousness. And this created a scale, and there is an infinite scale that actually is measurable to when you make reference to our higher self, that is simply a less intoxicated spirit of the creator.
So would that be the same as like a less defragmented self?
Well, it's less fractalized than we are. It's less intoxicated with free will, so its awareness and of its authentic self or its creatorness is actually just dramatically greater than ours. Now, what we're describing is the process of consciousness evolution, which is synonymous with enlightenment. Enlightenment is nothing more than that process of returning to the creator. And we misperceive enlightenment because of the Buddha's teachings. We perceive enlightenment to be a destination.
Mm.
And it's not a destination, it's a process. So everyone that is hearing this, everyone that you've ever known, including yourself, you are enlightened to the degree that you have allowed yourself to become enlightened. In other words, to the degree that you have allowed yourself to surrender that perception of separation.
So, and that kind of starts with that awakening, right? Where this isn't working. I need something more, right?
Yes. Yes, and we are at the range of consciousness that we experience. We are programmed to create this false perception of self. Everyone begins in what is called primordial darkness, which simply means that we know nothing, we don't have any baggage, we haven't lived a lifetime yet. We perceive ourselves in what we experience constant motion and kind of a double shot of the perception of separation and unconscious. And unconscious is a distortion that we are tasked with overcoming. And so we begin essentially in chaos. It is up to us, by use of our awareness, to, in the process of analogy, learn what we like and direct that what we like towards a greater stability. And Earth has had a great problem with finding that stability. We have cycled in the lower levels of the range of consciousness that we experience. And so all of this is an anomaly. We live very much in our false perception of self.
So is that also like macro and micro philosophy?
Well, philosophy is the exploration of who we are and what we're doing here and all of that sort of thing. And we decide on certain different philosophies, decide on different beliefs that the philosopher that creates the process will direct us towards greater happiness, essentially, by greater understanding. But this creation of this false perception of self causes us to experience perpetual stress. Stress is nothing more than the difference between our expectations, which are a result of our false identity, our perception of self, and what really is. If we were able to experience things as they really are without our interpretation of it, we would no longer experience stress.
So is that like I should do this, it's supposed to be like that?
Well, yeah, the Buddha offered a concept called being an empty vessel. And being an empty vessel simply means that you enjoy every experience as it really is without your interpretation. We don't come into a situation, we don't anticipate what the outcome of that situation is going to be, so we're not disappointed.
Okay, so I'm fascinated with this topic for lots of reasons. But one, when it comes to, I truly believe that we're created for connection.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are at that state that we don't bring in those false perceptions, our own personal stories or truths into the situation, like you said, being an empty vessel, how does that play into being connected with one another and needing one another? Because I feel like if we're so present that nothing matters, for a lack of better words, not nothing matters,
Not a matter.
but
You still interpret experiences, but you interpret it without your baggage. You see, right now we perceive ourselves as separate. And what attracts us to other people is a resonance with that other person. Or in other words, their degree of advancement along the consciousness scale resonates with ours. We choose a spouse, ideally we choose a spouse because that we feel comfortable in that spouse's presence and vice versa.
so would that be the same
And so,
frequency or a near frequency?
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Or
yeah,
vibrating on the same.
yeah, right. And the reason we choose a spouse, taking biology out of it, the reason that we attract a spouse is because we become each other's primary teacher.
Whoa, that's big.
Well, the reason we choose a spouse is because we resonate. We feel that comfortable. Remember, I told you when we feel love because that person allows us to drop our false perception of self and we feel who we really are. Okay. So you think about, you counsel, couples counsel. Okay. I would wager that if you pursued the Inquisition, that your questions this way, every time that there is a rift between the couples, someone has decided that they're going to promote their false identity more constantly. Every time, say, use an old example, say the wife is at home and the husband comes home and he's been out in the world conquering the world all day, making money and doing deals and all of this sort of stuff. And he brings that false perception of self home with him and he brings it into the kitchen where the wife is. Okay. And she immediately puts her guard up, saying, you take that false perception that you brought home with you and leave it on the doorstep and you come back in here as you are. Mm. And so, okay, it changes. When he doesn't drop that, or she doesn't drop that, women do this too. I mean,
Right.
We have different factors, but whoever comes in there with that false perception guard up loses that resonance, and there's conflict.
So would you say that guard is like a shield of protection per se, or protective? In a lot of circumstances, say like trauma, a lot of people have just taken those on and worn them all the time so they don't have to be vulnerable, right?
You're right. Yes. But we're going to get to trauma in just a second. Okay. We're going to get to trauma in just a second. And when a marriage breaks down is because they have both retreated into that false perception of self all the time. And they can't talk anymore. They can't communicate. They can't resonate.
So would you say false perception is fear?
Well, it is fear. This false perception of self is who we think we are. And if you're not who you think you are, that's fearful.
So if who you think that you are isn't matching with the way that you are presenting yourself? Can you
Well, you do, you present yourself the way that you think you are, and therein is the problem.
Okay, so but
You
it
can't,
doesn't
you can't,
match to who you want to be.
well, you don't know who you want to be. You're still in the process of discovering who you truly are. That's the process of healing. But you have a marital relationship, and say it's it's had its ups and downs, and over 20 years you have those changes, and you've been teaching each other, and you've essentially grown, to use a common phrase. You've grown together, but it's been a stair-step process. Sometimes the female leads, sometimes the male leads, sometimes the female leads, but you've grown together and essentially elevated your willingness to be your authentic self more often. And then for whatever life circumstances, since I'm a male, I use the example, you read that middle-age male crisis time. So wait a minute, I've been doing this for, 40 years, and now I want to really be my false self and go get my Corvette or whatever it is. That's not the authentic self that the spouse has become accustomed to. When he stays in that false perception of self, then that breaks down the communication. They're no longer growing together. Hopefully he'll grow through that in a period of time, and she's very patient, and they're back reciprocating the authentic self, but that doesn't always happen. If that doesn't go away, if they can't reestablish that authentic self to authentic self relationship, then it's time to move on. Time to let, exploration with new people come into play. Getting back to a trauma differs from our normal interpretation of an experience, because that thought, that experience that that person is having at that time overwhelms their capacity to interpret whether they like it or don't like it. When someone experiences shock, say they've had it, the tornado came through last night, and they're in a condition of shock, their awareness has left their body. It's not directed, it's outside of their body, and they can't relate to people, places, or things around them at all. You can redirect that awareness inside with a simple procedure of touching them physically. You can touch their knee, touch their elbow, touch their shoulder, touch their forehead. That requires them to bring that awareness back inside their body. And they get over shock. The awareness, they may be traumatized, but the awareness is back in their body, so they can relate and think and function. When we have an experience that is traumatic, then what has happened, some of these thoughts that they have processed in the course of that perceived experience were overwhelming. And so that individual thought has not been assessed. They've not been able to make a decision about that thought, whether they like it or don't like it. And so that will remain an empty space in the wheels of their experience. And that experience will remain as traumatic and a hindrance to their future interpretations of other experiences that may have similar features. It maybe the trauma happened in a bright sunny day in the woods. So when they go into the woods on a bright sunny day, then that re-triggers that void in their experience level, for example.
So can you talk about that void a little bit? Because you were saying that it stays when you can't decide whether you like it or don't like it. And I think most of us who have gone through trauma would be like, well, we don't like it. So,
Well, you're aware that you don't like it, but you still you haven't isolated that thought in order to make that decision.
so how would you do that?
And okay, well, I'm going to tell you. EMDR can be effective in bringing awareness to that experience. But the problem with EMDR, bilateral motion and things of that nature help them change their perspective of the total experience. But to completely heal the experience, what you have to do is isolate that thought, which the experiencer perceives to be a moment in that thought. Okay. So if you're guiding somebody, if you're helping someone to deal with the trauma, you ask them to go to the beginning of the experience, and you just tell them, I want you to scan through that experience. You don't have to relive it, but I want you to scan through it, and I want you to find the peak moment of your emotion, when your emotion is absolutely the strongest. And they will find it in an instant. I've yet to find anybody that can't find that moment. They say, okay, I got it. And you say, okay, I want you to take a photograph of that moment, whatever you're looking at. I want you to freeze it in time. And if you do that before you do EMDR with them, then they will, by focusing their awareness, focus their awareness on that moment, and they will make the decision of whether that they like it or don't. Invariably, they're going to say they don't like it. But once you say you don't like it, it's okay, because you can put it into perspective. Your awareness has come back into your body to reassess that moment. Now, I use some other methodologies that do the same thing, and one of them has to do with them turning around, taking that photograph, pushing it in front of them, sticking their finger in it, and turning around 4 times. Now, all that does is the photograph that they've taken distracts their ego mind, that monkey mind, as the Buddhists call it, and it gives that monkey mind something to do. And it's like you're trying to get some work done, but you got a 3-year-old that's running around and playing and wants your attention. So you have to give that 3-year-old something to do so you can get some work done. So you give the 3-year-old a ball. Focusing their attention on that photograph while they're feeling the feeling that goes with that photograph distracts that monkey mind so that their awareness can heal that moment.
It's interesting as you were talking, because I just have been through something really traumatic. And initially, the whole incident, I was like, of course, I don't like that. Right. But as you were talking and you were even saying scan to a moment that was before even the incident that I felt the most powerful. And I had not really gone back and thought about, did I or did I not like that moment and that feeling, because in that moment it didn't seem significant. And so I kind of like logically was like, okay, this shouldn't
You
affect
just
me.
dismissed it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But I have never found anyone that had more than 3 moments in a traumatic experience, no matter how traumatic. I worked with Vietnam PTSD sufferers and people that have experienced some horrendous traumas. But in what they perceive to be an experience, I've never found more than 3 moments that were like that we had to go back and bring
Interesting.
their awareness in. And they're amazed. It goes away. I had one guy several years ago, and I'll never forget him. He was a Vietnam War vet, and he was in a wheelchair. And there was nothing physically wrong with him. He wasn't injured, but over time, he had so many traumas that it sapped his energy, that he didn't have enough energy to run his body. And I worked with him for about an hour, and we cleared probably half a dozen traumas. He really got into it. He was ready to get rid of it. And we cleared about half a dozen traumas, and he walked out of my office. He came in a
Wow.
wheelchair, and he walked out, and he was holding on to the wheelchair. I mean, he had a lot more work to do. I don't mean that he was completely healed, but he could restore enough energy in order to make his body work enough to stand and to walk. And it'd been a
Mm.
long time since he walked, so he had, atrophy and all that stuff. He had to deal with that. with that. And we continued to work, and he got a lot better. He didn't finish as long as I wanted to go with him, but he was dramatically better. And that is true to use the Army example. You have two guys in a foxhole and they're bombarded all around them. It's the exact same experience for them, but one of them interprets it with a trauma and the other guy doesn't.
Right.
And the only difference is the guy that experienced that trauma, his condition of being was low enough that he couldn't process those experiences, those thoughts as they were coming in. And so he didn't make that assessment. And that whole experience became traumatic for him, while the other guy said, I'm glad that's over with, and gets up and goes off and runs away and does his stuff.
Okay. So I'm fascinated.
Okay.
When you were talking about, just to kind of go back to the couple, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And allowing one another to be their authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that in those moments they feel safe enough, vulnerable enough
Yeah.
to allow their authentic self to be without having that protection? So that
Yes.
fear isn't there.
Right. Yeah. Our authentic self is what we're evolving towards. That's what the entire process of consciousness evolution is evolving back to that unity, to that oneness with the Creator. And so we're actually, what we're doing at this level, we're healing the emotional baggage that we've been talking about, and we're beginning to surrender that false perception of self, which will continue for a long time. But we will get to a point where that false self disappears, and then we're purely working on surrendering that perception of separation from the Creator until we eventually are reunified.
So, can you talk a little bit more about that false perception of self and break it down maybe into what that looks like? A lot of people say disconnected from self, or a negative view of self, or the story that they tell themselves. So, can you talk a little bit more about your definition of false perception of self?
Okay. We've incarnated a myriad number of times, and we simultaneously exist in both just for the sake of familiarity, the metaphysical world and the physical world. Our metaphysical self is enduring. It's eternal. Our incarnate self is an analog projection of our metaphysical self. In other words, we're just projecting who we perceive ourselves into this body, and we live a lifetime. And there are all sorts of things we have to undergo, forgetting of who we are and past lives and all that stuff. So we're not beginning anew, but we're beginning at the condition of being that our consciousness pattern, our metaphysical self, is before we incarnate. The reason that we choose the incarnation that we are currently living is because it is most likely, it is most probable going to provide us the opportunity to have experiences that will fulfill the opportunity for us to learn the curriculum at this range of consciousness that we're supposed to learn. And so we do this over and over and over. We'll incarnate as male and female and black and white and yellow and rich and poor, all of those, because we need the perspective of living a lifetime in order to get a 360-degree understanding of the things that we're tasked with learning. From the moment of birth, that condition of being that we begin with the first thought that we begin to process as an infant, we begin to create a hierophant, a false perception of self. That's all a hierophant is. It is a false identity. It's an ego. It's all the same thing with different words. And we are learning based upon what we like and what we don't like, what we want to incorporate into that identity, that false identity. We are motivated to get more of what we like, but we don't know what we like. And so if, we like mom to hold us, and so we'll cry until mom holds us, and then we become toddlers. When we become toddlers, our awareness escalates by design, and we will keep that same level of awareness until we reach puberty. Puberty is another break point. When we reach puberty, the reason that teenagers have such difficulty is because they have all this vast new awareness, but they have no information. And so they're gaining information by being rebellious and so on and so forth. But all this while, we're amending this false identity. And every time we have an experience, we make a minute little change in our perception of self into our false identity, in the hopes that this, if it didn't get us what we liked, if we didn't get more accolades and support of our identity, then we will make a minor little adjustment. So, well, maybe, if I dress this way, or maybe if I act that way, or whatever, in the hopes that that little tweaking of this false identity will get us more of what we like. And we continue that until we reach that point in our life where we have an awakening. You said, this isn't working. This false idea is not getting me more of what I like. So what else is there? And then we have to explore again in order to figure out, to invert that awareness. Hopefully we have a teacher that will guide us to do that. And then we begin undoing, healing all the stuff that we created from before, when we were stupid. I'll tell you a funny story. When I talked to my higher self, and when I had this meditative awakening, and I realized who my higher self was, and I had said, listen, I apologize for those teenage years. I swear I didn't know what I was doing. So we had a little laugh about that. But we will continue to tweak this false identity. We want this false identity to work. And so our family and our immediate family is our primary source of experiences until usually we go to school. We go to school, and they say the first day of school, you don't know anybody in the class, or 30 kids in the class. But by the end of the day, you decided that there are two people on the other side of the class you're going to be friends with, and they've decided you're going to be their friend too. What attracts each other on the other side of the room is their identity, their frequency is very similar to your identity, and you just feel more comfortable with these people, and vice versa. And not that there's anything wrong with the people in between, you just don't have that resonance with them. As we mature and we have other association, and that's how we make friends. To this day, that's how we make friends. I feel comfortable with you, and you feel comfortable with me, so let's hang out. The same is true with family. We all have, you go to a family reunion and you don't know 90% of the people that are there that came in from all over the country, but you go around and say your hi, how are yous, and all that stuff. But by midday, you end up at a picnic table with 2, 3, 4 people. Everybody there is family, but these 3 or 4 people you feel comfortable with. And so you hang out with them, and you spend the rest of the afternoon sitting at the picnic table eating. But we join groups the same way. A group is nothing, groups are nothing in an accumulation of individuals. And so we feel comfortable with a group, and the group feels comfortable having us as part of that. That's how we choose a spouse. And so these categories become peer supports, and that's PIER, just like a boat pier, that hold and support our identity. They keep it in place. When we lose a peer support, say a spouse dies, okay, that was a significant peer support for our false identity, and we experience grief. Grief is fear. It's a fear of the instability of our identity, but it's also fear of the loss of what we perceive to be love. We perceive that we were getting love from that spouse, but the spouse was simply giving us the opportunity to be our authentic self, our true love self. And so we fear the loss of that, primarily because of the perception of what love is.
But that's so huge. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right so the listeners can also understand. I mean, I know you talked about it in the beginning too, is love is just in like simplistically when we are talking about love amongst people is
Mm-hmm.
that if I love someone or I feel that they love me is
Mm-hmm.
just because I am experiencing myself
Mm-hmm.
through them or
Well,
through
because of them, they're giving you permission to drop this false identity.
mm,
See, you already underneath that, if you think of your authentic self as gold, and you've buried the gold in the ground and you've piled a bunch of trash on top of it. Okay, so in order to get to the gold, you got to shovel the trash off and dig the gold out. And so a spouse allows you to do that. It allows you to reveal the gold that is already you. There's no other alternative. There's no, some people are not love and other people are. It's an all in all situation. But those people that don't recognize love, that don't feel love, are enhancing this hierophant, this false identity, to the point that they never allow themselves to experience their authentic self. Finding that requires that we allow ourselves to become vulnerable. And I tell this to people all the time. Has nothing to do with being vulnerable to other people. It has to do with being vulnerable to yourself.
that's so huge because I think that that is a huge misconception, right?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Your authentic self is good enough. I mean, you can't be any better than that.
But so when people don't feel safe to be their authentic self,
If they don't feel
they
safe, then they're going to keep that false self up.
and this is kind of back to the same situation and both experience it very differently. So say I could be in a relationship, a friendship where I fully love and feel my authentic self, but that other
Mhm.
person does not,
Right.
never
Yes.
allows themselves to let that guard down to be vulnerable.
Hmm. Well, it's going to be a one-sided relationship.
Right.
And
But
the
sometimes
person that
that's
does,
not known.
well, that's true, but the person that doesn't feel that love is simply still remaining there. They're afraid to be vulnerable with themselves. They haven't done the awareness work on themselves that their friend has. And there are lots of relationships like that. But the purpose of still having that relationship is we learn by observing others. We observe others that we perceive to be happier than we are. And we begin to emulate. It's the way selling cars work. You want to buy a new car. Well, you see somebody with and the emotional baggage as a 300-pound ball of concrete. And you were told before you were born, your mission in life is to simply run down to the end of the street. And we're going to give you new running shoes and a new running outfit. And you're thinking, oh my God, this is going to be so easy. I'm just going to run down to the end of the street. And then you're born and they hand you a 300-pound ball of concrete and tell you your mission is the same, but you got to carry this 300-pound ball of concrete. There's no rules that says you can't put that whole 300-pound ball of concrete down at one time, but that is your false perception of self. And so you're going to have to take it out a chunk at a time. So it gets lighter and lighter as you do the work to heal yourself, so you have more energy to accomplish your mission, which also includes more awareness. And so the healing process accelerates as you make progress.
Okay, so can I pick your brain?
Sure.
I
Yeah.
know we're almost out of time, but I'm fascinated at this conversation. So what are your thoughts on like betrayal or the perception of betrayal? If you're in a relationship, whether spouse or friendship, and you are your authentic self, you feel safe, but that other person does not, but that's not known. And all of a sudden they switch and you thought that they were authentic, but they're not. And now you don't know who they are.
Well, these are beliefs that you've incorporated into your identity. You know, the feeling your beliefs about this other person are part of your identity. And so what they've done is they've challenged the beliefs that you've incorporated into your identity. Oftentimes, just again using male-female relationships, oftentimes it's the male that deviates.
Okay. So recently a statement was said to me because I was like, "Oh, I lost trust in myself in this situation." And my counselor said to me, she was like, "I don't think that you did. I think that you were becoming more self-aware and you were just learning things about this person that you weren't aware of."
Mhm. Yeah, but what you're learning, what we can learn about is ourselves. The
Right.
other person is just providing us with the opportunity to become more aware of what we have incorporated into our perception of self. We don't
Mhm.
need another person. The irony is as we advance, okay, in our consciousness evolution, then when get we get to a point where we heal all the emotional baggage and we've given away large parts of our perception of the beliefs that are in our false perception of self, then we align with another person not on a codependent basis, but on a parallel compatible basis. And what happens at that point, it is not a matter of 1 + 1 = 2, it becomes a logarithmic calculation. And so the reciprocity that develops is tenfold because of the two together rather than addition. And that's when you really allow that authentic self to emerge and you learn, because in the next range of consciousness, which we are evolving towards, in this range of consciousness, we perceive that we can feel what another feels, that we can be empathetic with another person. But that's not what we have capacity to do. I can see how you're feeling, visual cues and so forth, and I establish a harmonic resonance with how I am with you. So we perceive that to be feeling what the other person feels.
Mm.
That's not feeling what another person feels. When we advance to this level of consciousness evolution, we literally will be able to feel what another person feels and vice versa. So we can assist them in their healing and they can assist us in our further healing. The next level of consciousness is determined to be over and we're ready for the next level of consciousness is when we form what is called a social memory complex, and that we perceive ourselves as an individual autonomous organism. We surrender that and become a social memory complex, which is our new perception of self, our new all-encompassing organism, which includes a multitude of other beings. If you think our task eventually is to unite in unity with the Creator, so the whole process is dissolving this free will intoxication, so that we become more unified as we progress up the line. You made reference to our higher self. Our higher self functions or lives at the level of unity. And so there's no distinction between them, but yet they can speak individually or they can speak as a group because they're that harmonized.
So is that kind of what you talk about on your podcast? I
Yeah.
was listening to some of it. So I'm
Yeah.
fascinated. Again, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying.
Yes, thank you. I want to go back to, we talk a lot or hear a lot about empaths, and we're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, we can feel what other people are feeling, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just, would you say it's more appropriate to say that we recognize that frequency maybe?
Well, we can sympathize and we can have compassion. Those are the preemptive levels of love that we have the capacity to share in this range of consciousness. Just like our task at this range of consciousness is becoming awareness, the next range of consciousness is healing all the we have accumulated in this range of consciousness, and we will become love just like we have become awareness when we're ready to graduate from this range of consciousness. literally become love. It's a condition of being. Beyond that, we will become, in the next range of consciousness, we will become wisdom. But it is hierarchical only because you have to build the floor of the house before you build the walls. You have to build the walls before you can build the roof. So we have to become awareness before we can truly explore love, and we have to become love before we can truly explore wisdom. We have to explore wisdom and become wisdom before we can become unity. We have to become unity before we become stillness. Stillness is the last inherent characteristic of the creator that we will become before we reunite with the creator.
Do you think that's possible as a human?
It's inevitable. It's not just possible, it's the design, it's the plan.
So explain that a little bit.
Okay.
Well, because so people pass away
Mm-hmm.
from being a human,
Mm-hmm.
maybe never being on this awareness.
Well, you can stay at any level as long as you want, but all the opportunities are provided for you to learn the curriculum and advance. And it's our metaphysical self that evolves, not our incarnate self.
Okay.
We take the lessons that we learn as what we perceive to be human, and that adds to or subtracts from our condition of being as a metaphysical being, our consciousness pattern.
So the level of consciousness as a human though, like cuz you were talking about awareness, you were talking about love and ultimately unity, are you saying that all of those are achievable as
Not at this
humans
range of,
here?
well,
Okay.
to a minor degree, we are those things. We are the complete creator, intoxicated with free will, which means we don't have the capacity to recognize that.
Right.
The people that we deem to be saints, people that we perceive to be integrous and moral and ethical and caring and all of those positive features, it's not that they were trained to be like that. Those are behaviors that are demonstrated that people that have achieved the higher frequency vibrations of this range of consciousness. It's immutable to everybody. Everybody will behave essentially the same way as all the consciousness on that level of advancement.
And that goes back to, correct me if I'm wrong, being able to achieve those levels of consciousness, how much we align with our authentic self.
Yes. Our authentic self is we're already where we want to be. It's a matter of getting the trash off.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I have absolutely loved this conversation. And
Well, good.
so, what would be one piece of advice that you would leave our listeners with? Because this is a lot to digest, right? For
It
somebody
is.
who
Yeah.
maybe is just coming to that point where they're like, this isn't working for me.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is right there, what would be your first piece of advice to them on maybe their next step in that adventure?
Well, it's extremely helpful if you have a guide or a teacher, someone that is accomplished in a meditative practice. Meditation is the practice of inverting and focusing that awareness inside. And the reason that you do it is you just feel better after you do it. Most people that come to meditation because they're running away from the stick. The stick hurts and they want to get out from under the stick. And because of that, it's very difficult for most people to begin a meditative practice.
Mm.
But if the stick hurts enough, then you're going to continue with that in the hopes that it's going to help you out of getting away from the stick until one day you're doing the same thing, running away from the stick, and then you get a bite of the apple. And you think, hey, that apple is really good. And so your motivation transforms from running away from the stick to chasing the apple. And the more you get of the apple, the better it feels. But what you're doing is inverting that awareness inside, and you're becoming aware of the emotional baggage. And awareness is our discovery tool and our healing tool, because when you discover what's wrong, you're not going to just leave it there. You say, oh, well, that's silly. I don't need that anymore. And you get rid of it. Then you start working on those beliefs that are causing you perpetual stress and problems, and you start throwing those out. All the things that we deem to be so traumatic on a social basis, everything from racism to war to you name it, is all because of the beliefs that we've incorporated as cumulatively and individually into our hierophant, into our false identity. And as you become aware of those, and why did I put that there? And just throw it out. You just get your awareness, lets it go.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So that would be find a good meditation teacher, begin meditating. A good therapist can be invaluable to help put the pieces of the puzzle together and direct you towards whatever methodologies that RRT is very good. Um, Cognitive behavioral therapy is excellent, helps you become aware of the thoughts that you're attracting and transforming those. I mean, there are lots of different methodologies that are effective with different people. And so I highly encourage, using therapy for what it was intended to be.
Yeah, thank you. And on that note, I know that you provide a service as well, and people can come to you for help and guidance. So, guys, this will be all in the episode description, but can you tell the listeners where to find you?
Sure, I have a website. It's the initial D, deangraves.org. And I have all my contact information and the different services that I provide on there. I've written 4 books. Enlightenment, Plain and Simple, is an introductory book, and it also gives you some tools that you can self-apply to begin healing the emotional baggage. It's available on Amazon. To explain in more detail the hierophant, the false identity, and also provide you more significant tools, that some of which you can self-apply, some of which someone doesn't have to be a therapist. Anybody can guide you through it. I put a script in there that they can follow the script and guide you through healing, called The Identity Model, and it also is available on Amazon. And then another book, Edifying Children of a Lesser God, which is more advanced, still simple. It's an introduction into the metaphysical things that we've been talking about. And I have my compendium book coming out. It'll be on bookshelves August 30th, called The Enigma of Consciousness, Spiritual Exploration of Humanity's Relationship to Creation. And it goes into great detail on all and many other things that we didn't touch on today.
Yeah, I think I could have talked to you for hours. So this is amazing. I love picking your brain. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and just your insight. We extremely value your time and energy. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Amber. I've enjoyed it. You've been delightful.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I have a question.
Okay.
Outside of that, have you read the book 2150 AD?
No.
So it's such an old book, but it talks about the macro and micro philosophy, which kind of got me
Mm-hmm.
started on this thinking and the language that you're using, for lack of better terms. So I just wanted to see if you had read that at all, because I wanted to get your thoughts about it.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I haven't.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
It talks about basically that the micro philosophy, right, is us the consciousness level, like you said, the full sense of self, and
Mm-hmm.
mostly living in fear. And then he, like, I guess, astro travels per se to a
Mm-hmm.
different time at more of a macro, where it's authentic self and not fear, but more in love.
Mm-hmm.
So that authentic self, and how even at that point, just the awareness, it was my introduction into this type of thinking. So it was just fascinating to me.
Okay. Well, a lot of people that are very able to do what they perceive to be travel and things of that nature misunderstand what it is that they're experiencing. Time is not linear, as we perceive it to be. You can incarnate. A third density experience lasts approximately 76,000 years. And
Wow.
you can incarnate anywhere in that at any time. In other words, if there was a lifetime available that was 50,000 years ago that would provide you with the opportunities for experience that you needed to advance yourself, and you say you died tomorrow, you could incarnate in that lifetime 50,000 years ago, and in order to have that opportunity for experience. What we perceive to the future is just another part of that 75,000 year period, and it's all simultaneous. It's not really possible for us to grasp simultaneity, but everything happens simultaneously. And so the big thing is to learn the curriculum and advance. By learning that curriculum, you're fulfilling the purpose of creation that we talked about at this range of consciousness. And so it is all much more fluid. It's much more less structured. We have a tendency to categorize things. And so because we can, time is nothing more than our inability to process more than one thought at a time. I finish one, I got to get another one. It comes right in. We don't really have to do anything to attract that next thought. And that's why we perceive time as linear.
That makes sense. I have one more question.
Okay.
Just if you have time.
Sure.
So, would you say that my desire to search for keys to find answers is just my desire to learn what I need to learn in this lifetime?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we're motivated to get more of what we like. So the more you learn, the more of what you like comes to you, because you're changing yourself. You change your mind, body, spirit. So you become a more positive attractor to the thoughts that you want.
So it's basically just a dopamine hit.
Well, somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but the desire, everyone has the desire. But, if you're in school and you're not getting answers to what you want to learn, then you get bored
Mm.
and you get distracted. And all of this information has been provided to humanity repeatedly over time.
Yeah.
So it's nothing new, but it appears to be new because of its lack of presence in our experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. This has been amazing. Are you on TikTok at all?
No, I'm on Instagram and everything else.
Okay, okay. I was just curious because I know a lot of my followers and listeners on TikTok would gobble this up, be fascinated to hear you talk.
Okay.
If that's ever something that interests you, let me know. I do go live like 3 times a week. And so I would definitely love to have more conversations on that platform if that ever resonates with you.
Sure. Anything I can do to help disseminate the information, I'm anxious to do so.
Okay.
So, whatever platform.
I really think that TikTok, you could do amazing on there.
Okay.
For me, I didn't need to prove anything. So I bought my followers on Etsy. So you need 1,000 followers to go live on TikTok. So if you just
Okay.
go to Etsy and you put in real TikTok followers, you can buy it for like $10. And the more that
Oh,
you go
okay.
live, if we have conversations a few times, you can easily gain those 1,000 followers back.
Okay.
But I was like, I don't need to prove anything. I just want to get my message out and reach people. So I did it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would be honored. Yeah, I think that you would be a big hit on there. And I think your message
Okay.
would be well received by many.
Okay. Well, I'll check that out this afternoon.
Okay, yeah. I really appreciate your time and your knowledge, and I hope that you have an amazing day.
Thank you, ma'am. You too.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
The views and opinions expressed by myself and any guest on this podcast are solely ours and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of any organizations we are affiliated with. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. As always, consult with a trusted healthcare professional regarding any medical conditions or concerns.